I love your journey metaphor and lighting the way and everything else. And you referred to autonomy and that sense of being in charge of your own journey. And we've written in our book, it's our final chapter actually, is about agency, teacher agency. And what we often say now is that if this book had a subtitle, it would be, you have more control than you think you do. And I remember seeing Adrian present for one of the very first times, actually, and it was a time when I was actually quite angry in retrospect. I think I was quite jaded. I was on the wrong path, to take that metaphor again. And Adrian said, "You're not in traffic, you are traffic," which is taken from the TomTom ad, isn't it?
Yeah.
But it's this whole idea that ranting and raging against the system has its place. I genuinely think it does have its place, but actually acknowledging that there are things we can do. However, still, what you said about Angie, about is it too small? Well, no, because actually that single interaction with that deputy head who is vomiting on their way to school every morning, as one was who I spoke to the other day, will make a difference. That may well keep that deputy head in the profession. That may well lead to that deputy head influencing the lives of, dozens of teachers and thousands of children. So yes, so just a sense of what it's one of those words that's widely interpreted. But what do you understand by the term agency, Adrian?
Agency for me, is about having a sense of really what's in your control. It's having an acute sense of what also matters, because there's lots that we can control which will make no material difference to our lives whatsoever. For example, like, I don't know, the type of car we drive, apart from like safety standards, pretty much whether I drive an Audi, a Golf or a Ford Focus doesn't actually make any difference to my life. So yeah, it's about gaining a sense of mastery and control over the important aspects and sifting through the stuff that really matters and investing your time and energy on that, and then letting the rest go and part of it is coming to peace, I think, and accepting the things that we need to let go of.
Yeah, and there's a concept I've come across recently via an education psychologist, I believe, about healthy boundaries of responsibility. And I've been working a lot with head teachers recently. And let's be honest here, head teachers are absolutely on their knees at the moment, absolutely on their knees. And I'm genuinely concerned for many of them. And because we work in such a hierarchical system, we often end up talking about well-being, and it ends up very quickly moving into SLT bashing or head teacher bashing, because it's the head teacher's job to create the climate. And to an extent, that's true. So if you've got a head teacher who leaves to take their dog for a walk on a Friday at 4 o'clock every week, that's brilliant, because that's saying to staff, you can do this too. But in a sense, expecting head teachers to solve all of our well-being problems, it isn't right, it isn't fair. And actually that idea of taking control and knowing where those boundaries of responsibility are in a job that is exhausting, it is stressful. It's also massively joyful and hilarious and fulfilling. But yeah, what about you, Angie? Any thoughts on agency?
Yeah, I was just thinking about that sense of that you just touched on, of taking personal responsibility, and kind of where individuals' personal responsibility in the institution lies, and where the head teacher's responsibility towards well-being lies. And one of the things that I talk about a bit in the book, but I'm thinking about more and more frequently, is that this job that has such purpose and has such a why is one that I feel like most teachers take with a great sense of responsibility. It feels like a really kind of, I'm not married, but I imagine that moment when you get married and you suddenly think, oh wow, I'm married. It feels like teaching has a sort of similar level of kind of significance, that you're now a teacher and you're in a class with your own 30 kids in front of you, and you've really got a big job to do. And I feel like part of that responsibility taking requires people to step into the responsibility of being adult as well, and being really, really careful about self-management, and being really, really responsible for themselves. And I say that as somebody that is passionate about ensuring that people work in nourishing environments. As much as I could, I wanted people to feel like they were being also really well looked after. But that doesn't take away the personal responsibility. That doesn't take away the fact that we've stepped into a job that is hugely responsible, and we need to know ourselves well enough to know when we're approaching ill health, when we're approaching exhaustion, when we're approaching a point where we need to say, I can't do any more work now. Because in a sense, as an adult, it's no one else's job to tell you that. It's your job to know that. And it feels like to me that that's the best model worthy of imitation that we can be for young people, is that we really know ourselves, and that we teach them through showing them how well we know ourselves by taking responsibility.
Yes, and I love teachers and I love teaching, but there is a little bit of a streak. There are a couple of streaks that run through teachers, a couple of themes that have come up. One is perfectionism. If you're a perfectionist and a teacher, it's very, very hard to reconcile those two things. And the other one is the desire to please other people, to be seen to be doing a good job, because we're working in a school. And so that tendency to kind of, what's the word I'm looking for? To regress to that infant status and to want to be patted on the head is there, I think, in teaching sometimes. But what we need to accept is that it is a job that is noisy. It's a job that is hungry. It will eat you up. It will eat your time, your energy, your emotional reserves. And it's a job where the to-do list is never done. And once you accept those things, you also accept that you have to set your own boundaries. There's nobody who's going to give you a prize for dragging yourself in with, in former times, a hacking cough or a limb falling off. No one's going to say to you, I remember my year, I used to do this because I was a people pleaser. I remember my year 11s and I was in front of them and I had been vomiting all night, and I dragged myself into work because I wanted to show that I really, really cared. And this boy just looked at me, I think his name was Connor. He said, "Miss, why are you here?" And it was just this absolute, I love teenagers for that, this moment of clarity of what are you doing? You're not, no one's winning here. Yeah.
I'd like to go back to one of your points, Angie, about the kind of setting the example to young people. There's a book I read by a developmental psychologist called Alison Gopnik, called The Gardener and the Carpenter. And in it, she says, she's talking primarily about parents, but it definitely applies to teachers too. It says, children learn far more from their caregivers' unconscious behaviors than any of their conscious manipulations. So we can talk a good talk about looking after yourself, moderating social media use, getting a good night's sleep, staying hydrated, all that kind of stuff. But if our students see us as these worn out, Emma, to use one of your phrases, Emma, a worn out husk at the front of the class, I think we are selling our students short. I really believe in our personal responsibility to set a good example. And that doesn't mean being perfect well-being role models. You know, we don't have to, adopt a vegan diet and know all the asanas of yoga and etc. But it does mean, like you said, Angie, knowing yourself, setting boundaries. And with that setting boundaries, which is about agency, because it's saying, here are my lines and I'm not prepared to go over, or I'm not prepared to do this or accept that. Part of that means that you might face some flack, and you've got to know how to handle that flack. So like you said, Angie, about being a school leader and going against the grain, that grates with some people. And I remember very clearly in one school where I was really clear about the things I was prepared to do and not prepared to do. And I was on the SLT at the time. My head teacher did not like it at all. And she would make passive aggressive comments like, "Oh, Adrian, before you rush off this evening." And it's like, I got into school at 7:45 and I'd leave about 4:30. Like, that is a long bloody day, no matter what industry you're in. But I was just like, actually, my bus is at 4:30. I'm sorry, this will have to wait till tomorrow. And I'd literally just go out the door. And I wouldn't respond to emails in the evening, and I was getting texts on my personal phone and I just wouldn't reply. And then I had to have a conversation and say, please do not contact me on my personal phone unless it's an emergency. And by an emergency, I mean literally life and death. Like, even if it's Ofsted, I don't want to know until I get into school in the morning. Yeah. And you have to be willing to have those difficult conversations. And this is a topic we talk about in our book, Emma. but equally, it got to a point where I was not, that school environment did not suit me, and I used my agency and I left, and I found an environment that was better suited to my, you know, my values, my purpose, my outlook, my philosophy. And I think that's really important.
I think some of the things you're saying there is about creating an environment in which you're getting to either a hard yes, this works for me, or a hard no.
Yeah.
And there's nothing wrong with sorting in that way to find the place in which we can thrive. You know, sometimes we kind of hedge our bets and we think maybe things are going to get better, but actually, you know, when we really put ourselves out there with agency, with, you know, using that autonomy, we can begin to sift in a way that's really helpful for ourselves. We can find those people who will say, effectively, you can't work here if you're going to behave in a way in which you're putting your well-being first. And then we can make a decision about it. Goodbye, perhaps. Perhaps. You know, just one other thing I wanted to say about autonomy and agency was that this profession has been one that has been saying for so long, we don't have any autonomy. We're never given, you know, our autonomy is stripped away because successive governments, because successive policies, because of successive top-down bureaucratic systems. And it is the kind of difficult bit of showing it in areas that are going to be quite challenging that I feel often is the bit we need to push. Because of course we do have autonomy, we do have agency, we are able to say, don't contact me on my personal phone. I'm not going to take that. You know, we can express it in certain areas.
And that, you know, we've all alluded to this, but that huge contrast between different schools and how a different school can feel like a completely different job. So if you're watching and you are really struggling and you've hit that line where actually you're close to that hard no, please know that don't make that a hard no to teaching, make that a hard no to that particular context and try a different one.
They tell me life is beautiful.